Hello everyone, Evan from MonkeyDM. In this video I'll talk about how to build memorable cities for your players to go through and how to quickly build them.
Let's do this.
The first thing you're going to want to determine is the size of your city. Why? Because the bigger the city, the more likely players are to spend time in it. And if you want your players to simply pass through it, you're better off doing a smaller city rather than a bigger one if you want to give them a lot of quests and things to do in that very city. Now that you have the size of the city, determine its location in your world, which will also help determine the races which populate said city. In the Dwarven Mountains, probably gonna be a lot of dwarves. Elven Forests, same thing. Or you could just make it a very cosmopolitan city, depending on your setting. Now, you have to determine the reason why your town exists, which is oftentimes how it makes money. For example, was your town built next to a small river and as such farming lands grew and now it's a farming city? Well, could be one thing. Or was it built to extract the iron ore that is very present in a nearby mountain, in which case it's more likely to be a mining city? Or was it built atop the temple of a dead god to prevent him from ever rising up? Then probably gonna be a few temples in your city. Once you've determined how your city makes money or the reason it exists, you're gonna determine the main buildings in that city. Main buildings being, a smithy, marketplace, town hall, and so on and so forth. How you're going to determine which buildings are the main buildings for your city is correlated to the previous step. Meaning, it's a mining city made to extract iron ore, probably there's going to be a mining outposts, a mining town, which are all related to extracting iron. If it's farmland, well, going to be a lot of farms, obviously. Probably some hangars and if it's a city built atop the body of a dead god, you're probably going to find a couple of temples here and there. Once you've found which buildings are important for your city, spend a little bit of time creating cool description for these buildings and add a memorable detail to each so that your players remember them more easily. It could be just a cool NPC which is inside the building, it could be that all the windows of said building are in the shape of eyes, something which is catchy. Now don't go and write an intense description for every single building, only the main ones, unless you want to spend your time doing that, but. By that step, you can now determine the aesthetic look of your town, now that you have the main building, the location, and the size of the town. For example, the city of Dragonbane, which is built only of stone which can resist the fire of dragons. Now that's a very unique city, all made of stone. Or the city of Jolibois, which is built next to the Elven Forests and is a hub of alchemy thanks to all the rare plants which are found in this very forest. And the alchemy has warped the town. Now all the wood looks different, strange flowers are growing everywhere. And so on and so forth, depending on your town. If you're enjoying what you're listening to so far, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell button, and drop a like if you're feeling extremely fancy. Find a name for your town. I know this is the hardest step, but there's a lot of town name generators online if you cannot find inspiration, or you do that step once you've determined how the town functions and what its purpose is, and this way you can derive a name from it. Like I said, Town of Dragonsbane is probably because it doesn't like dragon. Something along those lines. Now, you can also at this step determine the presence of guards in your town, whether the force is big or small. Usually that's correlated with the size of the city, but potentially not. Like I said earlier, if the city was built to prevent the rise of a dead god, probably there's going to be a lot of military force. If it's just a regular farming city, even though it might be big, the military force might be smaller. In regards to leadership, that's an optional step. Why? Because if you don't want your players to go and delve into politics for your town, unearthing the corruption and the rot which is found within the city, there's no point in going and creating a detailed leadership. On the other hand, if you want your players to go into politics, the various factions which populate the town and the conflict that they have, and you want your players to explore that, then by all means, write it. But that's optional. But if you want to do politics, determine who is the leader, who supports them, who opposes them, how those factions are at odds with each other, and what the party can do, or who the party can talk to shift the balance in power. Now, you have your town, you have the buildings, and all those things. The reason why you only detail the main buildings is because those are the buildings the players are more likely to go into. Probably not gonna go into some random cabin in the woods, although that might just happen. But that saves you time instead of writing every single building in depth. Plus, the players are often going to be like, oh, is there a store in this town? Or is there a smith in this town because I want to reforge my weapons? And you're going to be like, ah, yes, this town would have it because it's an iron mining town. NPCs are an important part of the town, obviously, because they're who the player will talk to. So you want to put your important NPCs in the various main buildings that we described earlier. If you're more of an NPC kind of person first write the NPC and then create a building appropriate for them. Or if you're more of a lore person first, create the building first and then you plop an NPC which would make sense inside of it. For example, the head of the Alchemical Association will probably be found in the town of Jolibois. A veteran dragon slayer would probably be found in the town of Dragonsbane. So now you have your town, you have your NPCs which populate it. You can generate some random NPCs off of many free websites online, or you can just keep to yourself a description of a few random NPCs as flashcards, which you can just pull out when your players are going to be in town and they will automatically ask some random person for something. This way you have a trade character and something to pull out real quick. But don't spend too much time on detailing each of them, otherwise you're never going to catch a wink of sleep. And I'm sure you have other things to do in your life other than playing D&D. Maybe. Now, let's recap the steps. First of all, determine the size of your city. To do so, determine if you want your players to do a lot of quests inside the city or not. Second, determine the reason that your city exists, which is oftentimes how the city makes money. Now that you've determined why the city exists, determine the main buildings in relationship to that reason. So, if it's an iron mining town, a smith would be important. If it's a town to protect from the invasion of monsters, then military fort will be important. After that, flesh out the description of those main buildings and populate them with the NPCs, or vice versa. Give the NPCs the proper buildings. Keep a few flashcards for some random NPCs, and there you have it. That's how you create a town in a few simple steps without having to spend multiple hours on it. Hope this helps. This was Evan from MonkeyDM, and I'll catch you next time.